Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, people of all ages, races, and creeds. Welcome to the greatest show on earth. Greg Anthony here for the investigative journal on FirstAmendmentRadio.com, as I've been here for years and years and years talking about the one subject that you don't hear anything about. That's the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order. Yes, and you're going to get a good taste of it today. And what I want to do, yesterday I did a show, and I asked the question, why in the hell don't the Jesuits in the Vatican, why aren't they ever held accountable for mass murder and genocide? And then I said, over the last 15 years, I've covered over 10 genocides. Okay? And I went on and on and on as usual. And I got an email from someone who said, Greg, you talked about 10 genocides, but what are they? Give us some facts. And I, of course, said, well, he hasn't been listening to my show, I guess. But anyway, I will give him one. And so today we're going to talk about just one genocide that occurred in the 1940s. So we're not going to have to go all the way back to the the Inquisition or the Protestant Reformation, when the Jesuits were formed to kill all Protestants and so that the Vatican could get their power back. We're not going to go that far. We're going to go into the 40s. And I assure you that if you go back over my shows over the last 10 years, you're going to find some really fascinating statistics and facts about how many times these people that I talk about here have been involved in fomenting, in helping, in actually killing people during these genocides. But they never get held accountable. So really, if you think about it, that's why the Democrats today, because really, the Democrats are now socialists and they are the globalists. That's why Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, even Vice President Biden never get held accountable for anything. In fact, the media covers for them because the same people control the media. And so, I thought what I'd do today is basically, instead, I did a whole show one time, many shows, on showing you how our government individuals in government are nothing more than stage actors. And what they've been doing is putting on a play or theater or movie for all of us. And we can basically say, at least since I remember in the 60s. And this has been going on and on and on. And it's one of the longest running movies, or let's call it a sitcom, that's ever been run. Usually they last, 6 to 10 years if they're good. This one's been going on since the 60s. That's where we're going to start. And it's an incredible story of how they have lied and cheated and buffaloed the American people and the world about really what they're doing. And so that's why you're seeing today this big show going on in Washington, D.C. And you know something? You guys are nothing more and me but extras in this movie. And the damn thing about it is, if you were in Hollywood, you'd be getting at least $50 a day. But here we get nothing. We don't even get to learn the behind the scenes of what's going on in the movies. You don't even get to learn really the story behind the story. And that's what I try to tell you on this show. But anyway, I'll get into that another day because it's a lot of fun when you start making an analogy between Hollywood and what goes on in Washington, in Rome, in London, in the major capitals of the world, because it's really nothing but a big, huge sitcom they're putting on for us, because nothing they tell us is the damn truth. Because the truth can't be handled, because the whole world will just collapse if they really knew what the hell was going on. And, one of the things I found out over the years was that when you get to this story about the Vatican connection to people like Hitler and Stalin and all these things, they don't want to hear it on the mainstream. and you're called nothing but a conspiracy theorist. So it's a tough road, but a road well traveled, and you can find out a lot if you listen to this show and take it on your own from there. There's so many things you can research because it's a mind-boggling story that is difficult in the beginning to comprehend, but once you get it, boy, it just keeps going and going and going. And that's the real story, the true story behind what they show to us on TV, what they show to us when they go around doing their, political events all over the world. When the Vatican starts going around saying we're going to go to this country to bring money for the hungry. What they're really going there for, we talk about. And so to get to that question, and I want to answer it, the person said, well, give us a genocide that, we can sink our teeth into. Give us one. And I said, well, okay. Why don't we start out with one that you don't hear much about? You always hear about the Holocaust and all the Jews that were killed, Hitler, etc. But during that same period of time, there was a huge genocide in Serbia. And that's really what I wanted to talk about today, and the Vatican Jesuit connection to that genocide. It's a mind-boggling story, and I'll tell you something. I first learned about it when I got together with an attorney by the name of John Levy, who was on my show many times, and he was representing the survivors, the family members of some of the victims of this genocide, and he brought a lawsuit in the Ninth Circuit, and that was before the Ninth Circus, I should say, the very liberal Ninth Circuit Court in San Francisco. And the case was called Alperin v. Vatican Bank, and that's Alperin v. Vatican Bank. And it brought out the same questions. He was asking for reparations for the people of this genocide based on the fact that the Vatican was involved. And he tried to first, in discovery portion of the lawsuit, get a total financial records from the Vatican, which John told me many times was very difficult to get. In fact, he could never get them. And the reason is they don't have to adhere to the regular banking rules that other banks have to around the world. So to get the Vatican Bank, get their financial records was impossible. So John's asking for the Vatican Bank financial records so that he could file for money damages for the people, the family members of the victims of this genocide. And what a lawsuit. It went on for 10 years. I interviewed John numerous times about it. Very interesting. Went on for 10 years in the Ninth Circuit with little advancement of the lawsuit. It always seemed to go one step forward, 2 steps back. I even happened to interview the attorney of the Vatican Bank. Okay? Now, I figured the Vatican in this country would have a huge law firm. Well, they were represented by one lawyer, a Mr., I can't remember his name, Lino or something. I remember speaking with him over the phone, and it was one lawyer in a little office. And he apparently had Vatican connections, and he was their point man here. So he was representing the Vatican in this country, and I got a nice chat with him. You could go to my shows, hopefully it's still there. And I found it fascinating. It was almost like, why did I even bother calling? There was nothing he was going to say, but I just found it fascinating that I could actually talk to the Vatican attorney here on this lawsuit. He was defending them, right? Well, John had a great case, if you really want to talk about the case. And one of his witnesses, and gave a deposition, which I happened to read, was a former OSS officer. This was right before the CIA was formed. An intelligence officer that was in Rome at the time, and he testified to actually seeing the trucks full of gold, much of it taken out of the teeth and stolen from the Serbian victims, brought in on trucks into the Vatican, and then wherever it went from there, who knows. And he testified to seeing this, and also testified to a number of other things as far as priests being involved in this genocide that he was privy to, being a foreign intelligence officer during this time. He also talked about the Vatican rat lines and about how the Vatican used to bring Nazi war criminals through the Vatican, giving them a new identity, and send them off to places like Argentina, etc., etc., etc. So here we have eyewitness testimony. We have a deposition pinpointing, a lot of great information. But you see, that never ever made it to the lawsuit. Okay? The media didn't cover it. It's probably one of the biggest stories ever when it comes to Vatican involvement in our day and age, let alone talk about Rwanda and some of these other things that have happened since. And guess what happens? 10 years go by, and finally, the Ninth Circus in San Francisco basically states that John had no jurisdiction to even bring this lawsuit. So it was quashed at the jurisdictional stage before it ever got to any farther. And their reasoning was that the Vatican Bank and the Vatican does not do business in the United States. Now, you think about that reasoning. The Vatican does not do business in the United States. Now, that to me is crazy. And you know it's crazy. So you know that the judges even cover up for these people. So how the hell are you going to ever get to the truth about Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and all of Bill Clinton and all the people? You see, if you're a globalist and you're embedded in this group that's basically a Jesuit organization, because if you talk to a lot of these people like Clinton and you talk to them and, you see some of the books they put out, and in passing they'll say, well, this was my mentor. This was my mentor. A guy named Quigley always comes up. A priest named Pierre de Chardin. They're all Jesuits. Pierre de Chardin, folks, was the person who created the New Age movement. Yes. Carol Quigley was Bill Clinton's mentor. Jesuit through and through. What do you think these guys are doing? And what a better way to really hoodwink the American people than to get the papacy involved, because they can hide behind the cloak of the papacy. And these government officials, why do they run to them for advice? Because they're not smart enough to figure out all this stuff. You got to admit. They go to the people that have been doing it for 500-600 years. And all this stuff is known this is carried on from generation to generation. And that's why the elite deal with them. That's why they get together at their secret occult meetings. And that's why they can figure out the strategies to bring us to this new world order, which has been their goal for hundreds of years. And they do it without anybody knowing, because they've gotten so much power here that they control the media, control our government, and control every aspect of our lives, to what we think, how we eat, what we drink, etc., etc. And you know it, and I know it. So, let's get to the Serbian genocide, okay? Let's talk about it. All right. Let's a few statistics here so you know what we're talking about. Okay. There were 700,000 Serbs killed, 80,000 Gypsies, 20,000 Jews, and that is a conservative estimate during 1941 and 1944. Okay, one of the biggest concentration camps was Jasenovac. We've done stories about that. And you'll be surprised that there's some Catholic priests that used to run the damn thing. Okay, at present time, the official Vatican and historians of the Roman Catholic Church, they tend to portray the genocide of the Serbs in Croatia during World War II only as a result of a tribal strife and an extreme nationalism in which the Catholic Church allegedly was not involved. Catholic analysts particularly try to shield Monsignor Archbishop Aloysius Stepanovic of Zagreb, who was beatified by Pope John Paul II and canonized by Francis I. See, they canonized the criminals, and you'll see why he was a criminal. Along with Pope Pius XII, during whose pontificate these atrocities were committed. Yes. Right after the Axis invasion of Yugoslavia, involving German, Italian, Hungarian, and Bulgarian military units, the Ustase regime promulgated race laws for the so-called independent state of Croatia, taking the Nuremberg race laws as their model. These laws were formally directed against Serbs, Jews, and Gypsies, yet their main targets were the Serbs orthodoxy, and the Orthodox world view. On April 17, 1941, the day of the capitulation of Yugoslavia, the decree for the protection of the people and the state was passed. Okay. They're doing it through the government, so they worked there with the government, right? They got experience at this. It imposed the death penalty for threatening the interest of the Croatian people or the existence of the independent state of Croatia. On April 25th, the law prohibiting the alphabet, the Cyrillic alphabet, was issued, and on April 30th, it was followed by the law of the protection of the Aryan blood and the dignity of the Croatian people. Serbian citizens were required to wear armbands. Now, where did they learn that? Well, Hitler did the same thing with the Jews, right? And guess who was Hitler's mentor? Do you know? Who was Hitler's mentor? Of course, it's Pope Pius XII. Our man again. So anyway, they got him in armbands. And let's see, they put the letter P for meaning Orthodox. It was in Serbian, right? On May 5th, 1941, the Ustase government passed a resolution declaring Serbian Orthodox Church on the territory of the independent Croatia as what? Illegal. On May 9th, the Serbian Metropolitan, whatever it is, of Zagreb was arrested. I guess he was one of the heads of the police department or something. On June 2nd, by the order of the Ustase, all Serbian Orthodox primary schools and preschools were shut down. Among those behind these directives were Catholic ideologues, including Archbishop Stepanek, who's been declared a saint. Oh boy. And now you get my drift of really what's going on? These decrees marked the beginning of the extermination of the Serbian Orthodox clergy. A host of Serbian new martyrs who shone forth in that period were canonized by the Serbian Orthodox Church. See, the Vatican likes to get rid of anything that's in their way, whether it be Jews, whether it be Christians, anything. What did they do to all the Orthodox Russians? And what did they do in Vietnam? That's a genocide. And we were the military point people, right? Killing many, many Buddhists and other people in that country. Wow. You know, and you can't blame the people that go to war. They don't know. Among them were, they're talking about these martyrs that were killed in the Serbian Orthodox Church. And there's a number of them cited in this article that I'm reading from Ortho Christian. And it's providing me a lot of information regarding the things behind the scenes in this Serbian genocide. We talked a lot about in this lawsuit and other stories about actually the Vatican involvement in this. But here's the background to it so that you can get an idea of how they operate. They're doing the same thing in most countries. It's the same MO. And our government leaders go to these people to get this valuable information, right? They know how to do it, so to speak. They know how to do it. They've been killing people for 500 and some years and more. Okay. On May 6, 1941, and excuse me if I don't get all these names perfect, on his name, or Slava, the feast of the great martyr George, Archpriest Branko was captured by the Croatian Ustase, headed by a teacher from named Ivan Sejfor, his son Ndebosa, a medical student, priest Dimitri Skorpan, rector of the parish there, along with 500 other Serbs, were seized with him. They were locked up at a police station and severely tortured, especially Father Branco's son. The Ustase tried to force Father Dobranovic to perform a funeral service over his own son, who was still alive at the time. In the morning of May 7th, 1941, all of them were brought to the woods and killed. In 1946, the remains of Archpriest Branco and his martyred companions were removed and interred in a common grave. That's just the beginning of this. So why in the hell, if Archbishop Stepanek is behind all this stuff and involved in this, did they ever make him a saint? Well, I think you know. These people... Look, the saints are basically criminals. At the beginning of the German occupation of Yugoslavia in 1941, Metropolitan Petar was advised to leave Sarajevo for several days and wait until the end of the first wave of the Croatian terror, but he decided to remain with his people. After giving explanations to the German and Croatian authorities along with the Catholic bishop in that area, the Metropolitan was caught and incarcerated in Sarajevo and died in prison on May 12, 1941. After severe trials in Zagreb and Gospic, he was put to death. Okay, he was incarcerated there, but he's finally put to death at the Jasenovac concentration camp and his body cremated. Okay, let me stop there because there's a lot of little facts here I want to talk about, but I'm going to really get to the bottom of this story. The Vatican and the Jesuits were behind this. They used this kind of idea of nationalism posed to whatever. They have two fronts working here. And they did the same thing in many, many different countries. And what they do then is they create this kind of fervor to basically exterminate people. And they are involved in it. And we're going to show you how they were even, many of these victims, before, we got testimony from people that priests were actually killing people in these concentration camps. Jasenovac was really a horrible place. And we always talk about Auschwitz and that, but boy, this one is just as bad. But we never hear about it, do we? And these people are never brought to task. Why? I ask a very simple question. If we know the Vatican is involved in this, and it's not just a couple of rogue priests or a couple of bad apples, why do we still do business with them? I mean, why do we even allow them to teach our children in this country? Because first of all, they hide the truth. Nobody knows about it. And when you start telling the truth, you're labeled a conspiracy theorist. And the real sad thing is, if you become very popular, which, you know what, I get emails many times saying, God, Greg, you should tell your story to millions of people. This show should be heard by millions. And I said, you know what, I'm glad it's not, because I'd be dead. And that's really the point. They'll allow you to speak like this. You got a few listeners here and there. I get, I go to some of my videos, 10,000, 5,000. They don't care. You start getting into the millions, and you start getting calls to talk, speak in public, create a movement. Oh, they're going to stop you in your tracks. And you can look at some of the people that have been in that situation. So they don't mind. What they'll do first is they'll attack you on the internet, which they did with me way back when, and create these false narratives like they still do today. But then they realize that they don't have to go any farther, so they let you go. But if you get a huge population of people listening to you, boy, look out, they'll take you down. Just ask some of the people at the Alamo Ministry. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, boys and girls, back for the second half hour. The Investigative Journal, Greg Anthony here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. We're going over one of the genocides that the Vatican Jesuit New World Order were involved with. And, wow, this is in 1941 through 1944 in Serbia. And let's get back to it. Now, the martyrdom of the Serbian Orthodox clergy that we talked about was just the prologue to the terrible tragedy at the Orthodox Serbs at the independent state of Croatia. The number of Serbs murdered by the Ustase is still the subject of much debate. Thus, according to the Commission of the Serbian Orthodox Church, they can estimate 800,000 were killed during those 3 years. 300,000 were expelled, and 240,000 forcibly converted to Catholicism. Okay? If they were forcibly converted to Catholicism, don't you think the Vatican was involved in this? And when you put together all the information we got in that lawsuit, Alprin v. Vatican Bank, where John Levy, the attorney, was trying to get reparations for the family members of some of the victims, and we saw exculpatory evidence from a OSS officer during that period of time who testified in a deposition that the Vatican was bringing trucks into Rome, into St. Peter's Square, full of gold, and that was taken sometimes out of the mouths of these people, and basically stealing everything they had, with money, wealth, whatever, bringing them in on trucks into the Vatican, and where they went from there, who knows, as well as bringing in many of the Ustase and Nazi war criminals who were given new identities and sent to places like Argentina. We have facts to that. It is not a make-up story. We're not conspiracy theorists. It's in a lawsuit that the Ninth Circuit, of course, the judges covered up and they dismissed the case, saying the Vatican Bank didn't do business in the United States. Now, isn't that a crock of shit? They didn't do business in the United States. These judges actually said the Vatican does not do business in the United States. So when John told me that, after 10 years, they dropped the lawsuit on those grounds, because you got to have jurisdiction to get into court. They said John didn't have any jurisdiction. And I said, John, why did it take 10 years? He said, and we both had a big laugh over it. John, well-respected attorney, who takes on cases that most people won't touch, understands the Vatican involvement in this. He's not a conspiracy theorist. He's a licensed attorney in this country, and he's also licensed in Europe, in London, in England. He knows he's still fighting this case in the EU. And he's fighting other cases against the Vatican. And I asked him sometimes, I said, John, why do you do it? And he said, well, somebody has to. And this guy is not somebody that doesn't talk about facts. And the many times I've had him on my show, the one thing I learned was that he had a lot of factual information through these lawsuits, because that's how you get information, you know. But the problem is, I said, John, did you ever, this case is pretty big. I mean, it's a genocide involving, the highest level of the Catholic Church, which is very instrumental in this country. How much coverage in the news did you get? He said, maybe 1 or 2 stories. They never want to talk about it. So I said, John, can I talk to their attorney? And to repeat what I said in the first half hour, I got a chance. He said, yeah. His name is Mr. Lino or something. I said, well, what big law firm does he work for? And he said, there is no big law firm. He's one guy. He's the Vatican point man here. And I said, where'd he come from? He said, he used to work in the clergy in Rome or something. So we talked. So I said, give me his number. I want to call him. So I called Mr. Lino. And here I am. I said, this is kind of fun. I'm talking to the Vatican attorney about this huge genocide case. And then when I go on the air and tell people, I get people saying I'm crazy, that I'm a conspiracy theorist. And I said, this really actually exists. This is a true story. But you see, it goes to what I've always said. People have been hearing the same thing over and over again, that they can't change their belief pattern. They can't realize that if you were a Catholic, you were involved in a pagan, a criminal organization. You've been told lies since you were a child. Since the first time you ever knelt down to say confession, or you knelt down in a Catholic church, you were told lies. And it's really hard for somebody, and I know that because I had to go through it, to change their whole belief pattern and realize this, because you don't want to admit, God, how many years was I brainwashed by these people? And once you get over that, you start seeing, thank God I got out. And I would talk to some of these priests. I did many shows with, I wanted to find Catholic priests that understood this story. And so I interviewed, a handful of them. And every time the same thing came up. They struggled with their faith. And these are good people, good people that wanted to serve the Lord. And when they found out the truth about what the Vatican and all of these crazy traditions they had were all about, the brave ones got out. But you know what? They get out broke. They get out without anything. They're not used to living in the real world. They're taken care of. They're given clothes. They're given food. They're given cars. They're given a place to live. They're given assignments. They follow orders. And I asked them, I said, well, what was it like outside of the religious aspect of being in the Catholic Church? What was it really like? And you know what they'd say to me? Greg, it was like the army. We just follow orders. And when you question, that's when the problems begin. And these guys that got out, and I would ask them, I'd say, well, am I off base on what I'm saying about the Jesuits? And they say, no. Am I off base about what I'm saying about the Vatican being a pagan organization? No. Am I off base by saying that their goal is to change the Bible and really to not allow people to find God on their own? No. And I said, well, how did you come to that realization? And they said, by the grace of God. Okay. And so what I'm getting at here is that when I just mentioned that Archbishop Stepanek, he was basically eyewitnessed killing people and running a concentration camp. When he is then just recently made a saint, guess who made him a saint? Pope John Paul II. I mean, you got to question, what the hell is this group all about? I mean, they make criminals into saints. They do it all the time. Pope John Paul II, you know his history, what he did before he was a priest? He used to work for a cyanide company, and his company used to sell the cyanide that killed a lot of people in the Nazi concentration camps. So, that's the organization, if you're a Catholic, you're involved in, and many people can't really handle it. And you can kind of understand it, because I was the same way. And I said this a long time ago to people, because people would say, wow, how come you're so really into this story? And why do you believe it? How can you believe it? Is it just what you're reading what other people have written? I mean, that's not the way. You always say, don't do that. Just find out for yourself. And I said, I'll be real honest with you. If I didn't live in Rome for 7 years and learn it the hard way, first going to that, I remember going to Rome and seeing the Vatican for the first time. And at the time I was an atheist. I didn't love God. I didn't love anything. I was a journalist, just wanted to get stories, ask questions, meet people, live a good life, have fun, drink Italian wine, eat the food, do that. That was me. And I literally, when I went to the Vatican, there was something that went through my head when I first got there. I said, maybe I can get closer to the church. Maybe I can find my way in life too. Because you know what? No matter what you say, if you don't have a belief system of something, you're very lonely. And so my belief system came more in the form of stories, journalism. My religion was the newspaper. That was my religion. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. But you'd go home, you'd drink a little wine. You were a lonely guy. Yeah, I can say it. So I'm sitting there in my first year in Rome going, wow, maybe I can find God again and be a Catholic. But then as the story started to mount up, and I was in the midst of the biggest Vatican Bank scandal in the history of the church during the 80s and late 70s and the 80s there, and saw firsthand the criminality of these people, none other than my own Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, who was the Vatican Bank president at the time, indicted on bank fraud and should have been indicted on murder of Roberto Calvi of the Bank of Ambrosiano. When I started seeing this, it kind of woke me up. I said, geez, how could this be an organization that professes to be, God on earth, Christ on earth, if they're involved in all these scandals? And I can name so many of them, so I started covering them, started doing it. And it led me into this idea that they're involved in politics, they're involved in all these world problems. And that's all I cared about, was the political aspect of this. Then as I came back to America, I started to see the religious side of this whole story, how they infiltrated churches, how they wanted to change doctrine in this country, how they wanted to rid people of Protestantism, not by saying you can't practice Protestantism like they did in Serbia when they said they closed down all the Serbian Orthodox churches and schools. They did that with a decree by the government through the Vatican. You could not go to a Serbian Orthodox school. You could not go to a church. They didn't do that here. What they did is they infiltrated inside the Lutheran Church, inside the Episcopalian Church. They put all these ecumenical priests, all these ecumenical false teachers on TV, these evangelicals. But actually, behind the scenes, their goal was to change the Bible doctrine, to take any kind of protest against the Vatican away, like the Vatican was against when the Protestant reformers said, you know what, you are the Antichrist. And the Bible says that. That's what the Protestants were all about. That was a major portion of their protest. So all the Vatican had to do was to get into these churches and get rid of that protest and play this kumbaya story, which they've done for the last 40 years. Come to the Vatican, we're all the same. Serbians, Orthodox, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, everybody come and we'll all worship together. Sounds good. That's not their goal. The goal in the end is to get them to worship Pontifex Maximus, the Pope. And they're doing a good job at it. That's why these genocides were there. That's why they killed the Orthodox people. That's why they killed the Buddhists in Vietnam. And I can go on and on. So, here we go with numbers like 800,000 killed. We don't even hear about it. And then when there's a lawsuit here to get any kind of reparations, some of our highest federal judges say, oh, you don't have the right to bring it here because they don't do business here. Okay. Now, the Jasenovac camp was one of the worst, but there was also the Genova camp. According to various estimates, between 45 and 75,000 people were killed there. About 70,000 people, mainly women, were exterminated at the Stara Gradiška. I have a hard time with some of these names. Concentration camp. You know, I'll probably get to this, but I remember doing this story a while back, and they even had a concentration camp for children. And you know what? When you go to the Nazi camps, you're going to find that they didn't talk about the one camp that I remember, and I can't think of the name now, but it was a specific concentration camp for kids. Okay. Now, we're talking thousands of people killed in these camps, and these are just several of the 20 Croatian camps where the Ustase tried to deliberately annihilate the Serbs. Now, what does the Ustase have in common with the Nazis? Okay, the Nazis were headed by Hitler. Hitler's mentor was Pope Pius XII. Here we have the Ustase, which is kind of like the Serbian Nazis, headed by Archbishop Stepanek. And what did they have in common? Well, remember they put little armbands on the Jews with their Jewish, star? Well, here they put armbands on the Orthodox people, and they had to wear a P, which in Serbian was Orthodox. Sounds similar, huh? In fact, many Serbs, one of the interesting stories here, many of these Serbs never even reached the camps because they died horrible deaths prior to that. The way concentration camp prisoners died, though, was horrific. Some died of famine, backbreaking labor, epidemics. Some were exhausted by shooting, but the majority of them were killed with cold steel. The Ustase would cut their throats with special knives, Serb cutters, fracture their skulls with hammers, cut off their hands, legs, fingers, ears, lips, put out their eyes, hack off women's breasts. It was said that one Ustase soldier used to wear beads made of Serb eyes, and another one a belt with Serb tongues hanging from it. Now, there's stories I've done about, sometimes when I read this and I start thinking about some of the stories I've read and some of the people that I've talked to about these pagan events that are held where they actually kill children and do these things. It's a pagan, it's an occult system. This is not normal human beings. Normal human beings don't cut people's ears off. Don't cut people's lips out. Don't wear eyes around their head, around like a necklace. Serb tongues hanging from them. Now this stuff isn't made up. Some Serbs were forced to drink the warm blood of their relatives. What do I talk about? You know, the pagan element here? The bloodlust? You know, what about these dinners we hear about going on in Washington, D.C., where they actually believe, some of these elites believe drinking the blood of young children makes them live longer? Yeah, goes on today. So they drink warm blood of their relatives who had just been butchered, after which they were stabbed to death as well. Now, the atrocities of the 30 Years' War, 1618 through 1648, when the Wallenstein's Croatian soldiers chopped off Czech children's arms and pinned them on their caps, were then repeated again here in the 20th century. I ask this question, can we explain these inhuman, brutal actions by the ethnic savages and archaic fanaticism of the Croats? And the answer is no. As is generally known, an ideology gives resolution to a murderer. The ideology of the Ustase, controlled by the Vatican, listen, the Jesuits are behind this. So their ideology, where did they get it from? In their head, later the president of the puppet independent state of Croatia, can be characterized as clerical fascism. Yes. The Ustase strove for full Croatian independence, and once they gained independence through radical measures, they recognized only Croats and Germans as Croatian citizens and gave them honorary Aryan citizenship, while Serbs, Jews, and Gypsies became state property, like cattle. Anti-Pavlik was uncompromising. The final solution to the Croatian question, 1/3 of Serbs were to be killed. 1/3 were to be forcibly converted to Catholicism. Now, why would he do that if he's not controlled by them? And 1/3 were to be expelled. His slogan was either something across the Drina or beyond the Drina. And this is how the slogan was implemented. Corpses with plates bearing the words, "To Belgrade for King Peter." Along with severed children's heads with the plates, Belgrade Market were drifted down the river Drina. It should be noted that Pavlik was a devout Catholic, even in exile in Argentina. Remember our man telling us on the lawsuit in Alpern v. Vatican Bank? Let me check the time because I always run out. Still got 3 minutes. We have an eyewitness, an OSS intelligence officer there during this time who testified just about, 10 years ago, that they were bringing the Ustase into the Vatican along with Nazis and sending them to Argentina. So guess what? So even Pavlik, he was one of them. He was in exile where? In Argentina. He would listen to the Mass every day when he was there. He imagined the state of Croatia as a bastion of Catholicism in opposition of what? Orthodoxy, Islam, communism. He was a staunch fighter for the traditional Catholic values. What are the Catholic values here? Cutting people's ears off? Wearing tongues around your neck? And called his comrades in arms to be ruthless. We have no right to be humane. And the Roman Catholic Church, together with its representatives, was involved in all of this. On May 5, 1941, Pavlik, jointly with the Minister of Education and Cults, Mile Budak, adopted the religious conversion law that obliged orthodoxies to convert to Catholicism. That's just the beginning of their involvement. Now, tell me, and I only have 2 minutes, if we have facts that bring us to this conclusion, that it wasn't just a few rogue priests or a few bad apples, as they like to say, that there was an orchestrated effort backed by Rome to do this, why do we allow them in our country to teach our children, to run the biggest universities in this country, to get millions and billions in grant money of our taxpayers without us knowing? Why do we allow that? Unless our government officials are just like Anton Pavlik. The only thing they're doing is doing it in a little different way. They're not coming and cutting your head off right now. They're taking away your mind and your head slowly. They're killing you in so many ways you don't even know. And they're bringing in their globalism as we speak. The end result being what happened in Croatia right here in America. And it will come to the point where you're not going to be able to speak your mind. You're not going to be able to bear arms. What do you think they want to take your guns away for? And the last bastion of freedom they know to topple over sovereignty in the world is to topple America. And once they can do that, you have what I've always said is a very simple solution and a very conclusion that they want. A one-world government and a one-world religion. You can call it anything you want. You can call it Catholicism. You can call it Buddhism. You can call it Christianity. But every one of us will be under their control. And if you talk against them, wait. What'll happen to you will happen to what those people in Jasenovic had to deal with. Because you know what? Your fellow man will come up against you because they won't believe. They'll think you are the dissident, just like they thought the Serbs were. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.